Someone is deeply, almost uncontrollably in love with you, and the reason might unsettle you more than it flatters you, because it has very little to do with who you believe you are. It has everything to do with what you unknowingly awakened inside them, and once you recognize it, you won't be able to ignore it. You may think love is built on attraction, shared values, or timing, but that belief is comforting, and comfort is often misleading. The mind prefers to avoid something darker, because the truth is that real love, intense and almost irrational love, is born in the unconscious, not in logic. And without realizing it, you stepped into a part of their mind they had been hiding from themselves for years. But here is the reality. You didn't just make them feel good, you made them feel understood in a way that frightened them. And this is where it becomes risky, because when someone feels understood at that level, they don't just admire you, they become deeply attached to you, completely and intensely. Most people fail to notice this. They assume being loved means being liked, but what is happening here is something far more powerful. You triggered a recognition, a realization of something hidden, something suppressed, something they were never meant to face. And somehow you became the reflection, not by trying, not by pretending, but simply by being something they didn't expect, something they couldn't control, something they couldn't define, and that disrupted their inner structure, because their mind was designed to protect them, to keep certain desires buried, to suppress certain needs, to deny certain truths. But then you appeared, and suddenly those defenses stopped working. And this is where it becomes even more complicated, because what they feel for you is not pure, it is not simple, it is not even fully conscious, it is a mix of longing, fear, projection, and something dangerously close to obsession. You didn't just attract them, you unsettled them. And disruption in the unconscious feels like fate. But here is what you may not have realized yet. You didn't do something obvious. You didn't say something perfect. You didn't follow any clear pattern. You broke an expectation, and that is what captured them, because the human mind depends on patterns and is completely shaken by unpredictability. You became unpredictable in a way that felt meaningful, not chaotic, not random, but deeply symbolic, as if you represented something beyond yourself. And that is when the projection started. They began to see you not as a person, but as an answer to a question they never consciously asked, an answer to a void they didn't know how to describe. And once that happens, they don't just fall in love with you, they fall into you. And this is where it becomes almost impossible for them to let go, because letting go of you would mean facing the part of themselves you awakened. And that is something the mind avoids at all costs. So instead, they hold on, even if it confuses them, even if it hurts them, even if it makes no logical sense. But here is the truth that may disturb you. You didn't just awaken something beautiful, you also awakened something unstable, because suppressed emotions don't come out gently, they erupt. They distort perception, they blur boundaries, they create emotional intensity that feels real, but is not always grounded in reality. And you can sense it, can't you? That unusual intensity in the way they look at you, that quiet tension in how they respond, that feeling that something deeper is happening even when nothing is said. But what makes it more complex is that they don't fully understand it either, because this is not happening in their conscious mind, it is happening beneath it, in a place where logic does not apply, where contradictions can exist together, where love and fear become hard to separate. And that is why their behavior feels inconsistent. One moment, they seem completely drawn to you. The next moment, they pull away. Not because their feelings changed, but because their defenses were triggered, because something inside them warned them that this is risky, that this is exposing something they are not ready to face. And this creates a pattern, an unconscious push and pull. Desire followed by fear, closeness followed by distance, intensity followed by confusion. And you are part of it whether you realize it or not, because a part of you can feel it too, that something about this connection is different, heavier, more intense, almost like it is drawing something out of you as well. And this is where the real question begins. What exactly did you do to trigger something this strong? Because it was not random, it was not luck, and it was not completely accidental. There was a moment, a specific moment, when something inside them shifted, when something in them recognized you. And once that recognition happened, there was no turning back. But here is the part most people never understand. That recognition was not about who you are on the surface. It was about what you represent in their unconscious. And what you represent is something they have been searching for, avoiding and needing at the same time. And until you understand that, You will not fully understand why they cannot let you go, or why this connection feels so intense, so confusing, so hard to explain. Because the truth is, you didn't just make them fall in love, you activated something they had been suppressing for years. And once something like that awakens, it does not go back to sleep. It waits, it grows, it demands attention, and eventually it forces a confrontation. But the real question is, when that moment arrives, will they face it, or will they lose themselves trying to escape it? They told themselves it was nothing, just a passing feeling, a temporary fascination, something that would disappear with time. But time did not weaken it. Time strengthened it. Because what they are experiencing is not based on surface attraction. It is rooted in something much deeper, something older, something buried within the unconscious. And the unconscious does not forget. It waits quietly. It observes. It collects pieces of unresolved desire and stores them in silence until something or someone brings them back to the surface. And somehow, that someone became you. But here is the truth. You did not enter their life simply as a person. You entered as a trigger, a psychological key, a symbol that unlocked something they had spent years trying not to feel. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because once the unconscious is activated, it does not ask for permission. It takes control quietly, subtly, but completely. Most people do not notice this. They think obsession is obvious. Constant messages, desperate actions, overwhelming behavior. But real obsession hides behind restraint, behind silence, behind the illusion of control. Because the deeper the feeling, the more the mind tries to suppress it. And suppression only makes it stronger. So what do? They analyze you, overthink every interaction, replay conversations in their mind again and again like a loop that refuses to end. Not because they want to, but because they cannot stop. Because you have become connected to something unresolved within them, something incomplete. And incomplete psychological patterns are among the strongest forces in human behavior. But here is what you may not have fully realized. The intensity you feel from them is not just about you, it is about what you represent. Because in the language of the unconscious, people do not fall in love with individuals, they fall in love with symbols. And you became a symbol of something they lost, or something they never had, or something they were made to believe they did not deserve. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable for them, because loving you forces them to face a contradiction within themselves. One part of them wants to move closer to you, but another part resists just as strongly. Not because they do not care, but because caring exposes something they have been avoiding their entire life. And this is where it becomes even more intense, because that inner conflict does not stay hidden. It shows through hesitation, through mixed signals, through moments of deep closeness followed by sudden distance. And you can feel it, can't you? That inconsistency, that emotional shift, that sense that something is pulling them toward you while something else is pulling them away. But here is the truth. They are not confused about you. They are overwhelmed by themselves because you have awakened a part of them that does not follow logic. A part that runs on emotion, memory, and suppressed desire. A part that remembers things they thought they had forgotten. And once that part is awake, it begins to ask questions they cannot easily answer. Questions like why this feels so familiar, why it scares them so deeply, why they feel drawn to it but also want to escape from it. And this is where their mind begins to split. Not in an obvious way, not dramatically, but internally and quietly. Because the conscious mind wants stability, but the unconscious seeks resolution, and resolution often requires disruption. So what happens next? They begin to create distance, not because they want to lose you, but because they are trying to regain a sense of control. They convince themselves that stepping back will quiet the feeling, that space will bring clarity, that time will weaken the attachment. But here is the truth. Distance does not weaken unconscious attachment. It intensifies it. Because absence removes reality and replaces it with imagination. And imagination is where obsession grows strongest. Now you are no longer just a person in their life. You have become an idea, an image, a projection of everything they cannot fully understand. And projections are powerful because they have no limits. They expand, they shift, they become more perfect, more meaningful, more necessary over time. And this is where it becomes almost impossible for them to break free, because they are no longer attached to who you really are. They are attached to what you have turned into inside their mind. And what you have turned into is something they cannot easily replace. But what makes this even more intense is that they do not trust it. They do not trust how strongly they feel. They do not trust how quickly it all happened. They do not trust how deeply it affects them, because anything this powerful must come with a cost, and their mind senses it. So it creates resistance, doubt, fear, not to destroy the feeling, but to protect them from what the feeling might demand. Because if they fully accept what they feel for you, they would have to face everything they have been avoiding, every suppressed desire, every unresolved pain, every hidden truth. And that is not something the mind does easily. So instead, they stay in the middle, pulled in both directions, wanting you, yet resisting you, thinking about you, yet avoiding you, feeling everything, yet expressing almost nothing. And this creates a tension that does not fade. It builds slowly, quietly, until it reaches a point where something has to break. But here is the question that should unsettle you. What happens when that tension becomes too strong to contain? Because it will. It always does. The human mind cannot hold that level of conflict forever. Eventually it cracks. But when it cracks, it does not always happen in the way you expect. Sometimes it leads to confession. Sometimes it leads to withdrawal. Sometimes it leads to actions that seem irrational, even self-destructive. Because when the unconscious takes control, logic loses its power and emotion becomes the rule, and that is the moment everything shifts. The moment where they can no longer pretend this is just a passing feeling, the moment where they are forced to face what this really is. But here is what you need to understand. That moment is coming whether they are ready or not. Because what you awakened in them is not temporary, it is not surface level. It is not something they can simply ignore. It is something that demands resolution. And resolution always comes with a cost. The only question is what they are willing to lose to avoid facing what they feel for you. At some point, the mind stops negotiating, because suppression has limits, and what they feel for you has already crossed that limit. You can sense it in the silence between interactions, that heavy, almost suffocating tension that does not disappear. It just waits, because what is happening inside them is no longer stable. It is building pressure. And pressure in the human mind always looks for release. But here is the truth. Release does not always come as clarity. Sometimes it comes as collapse. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable for them. Because now it is no longer just attraction or curiosity. It is confrontation. A confrontation with parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. Parts shaped by old wounds, old rejection, old beliefs that whispered that they were not enough, that they were too much, that they were unsafe to love. And then you appeared, and without trying, you challenged all of it. But here is the problem. The mind does not accept contradiction easily. It resists it, fights it, reshapes it, because accepting you would mean rewriting everything they believe about themselves. And that is not a gentle process. It is intense, internally intense. So instead of integrating the healing, they split around it. One part of them moves closer to you, craving connection, craving the intensity, craving the feeling of finally being seen, but another part pulls back just as strongly, whispering things they do not fully understand, that this is not safe, that this will hurt them, that this will expose them. And this is where it becomes even darker, because the closer they feel to you, the more exposed they feel within themselves. And exposure to the unconscious feels like danger, not just emotional danger, but something deeper, something that feels like a threat to who they are, because you are not just someone they like. You have become a challenge to their internal structure, a challenge to the identity they built to survive, and identities built for survival do not dissolve easily. They defend themselves quickly, sometimes suddenly, sometimes in ways that seem destructive. So what do? They begin creating explanations, stories to make sense of why this connection is not what it feels like. Maybe it is temporary, maybe it is not real, maybe they are overthinking. But here is the truth. They are not trying to understand it, they are trying to contain it. Because understanding it would mean admitting something they are not ready to face, that this, whatever this is real and deeper than anything they have experienced before. But this is where the tension becomes almost unbearable, because no matter how much they try to explain it away, their body does not listen, their deeper mind does not listen. That pull toward you does not weaken. It grows quietly, steadily, like something inside them is insisting that this matters, that this is important, that this cannot be ignored, and ignoring it starts to cost them, emotionally, mentally, even physically. Because unexpressed emotion does not disappear, it changes form. It turns into restlessness, into anxiety, into that constant feeling that something is missing, even when everything else seems fine. And you become the center of that feeling, not because they chose it, but because their mind has linked you to something essential, something they cannot replace with anything else. And this is where things begin to slip. Small cracks at first, moments where their control weakens, where they almost say something, almost reveal something, almost let you see how deep this really goes. But then they pull back even harder than before, because now they are afraid of themselves, afraid of how much they feel, afraid of how little control they actually have. And this creates a cycle that becomes more unstable over time. The closer they move toward you, the more they panic. The more they pull away, the stronger the feeling becomes, and eventually this cycle begins to break them. Not on the outside, they still appear calm, still composed, still in control, but on the inside there is chaos. Because you have created a psychological conflict they cannot resolve. They want you, but wanting you feels threatening. They feel connected to you, but connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what their defenses were built to avoid. So now they are stuck between desire and fear, between truth and denial, between moving closer and running away. And here is the part that most people never see. This is not just emotional tension, it is tension at the level of identity, because if they move toward you, they have to become someone different, someone more open, more exposed, more honest, and that version of themselves feels unfamiliar, unstable, even dangerous. But if they move away from you, they do not escape the feeling, they carry it with them. It follows them quietly, constantly, turning into regret, into longing, into that persistent question, what if they let something real slip away? And that question is what begins to break them. Because now there is no safe choice, only two painful directions. Face what they feel, or spend their life trying to forget it. And forgetting is not as easy as they hoped, because you are not just a memory. You have become part of their unconscious, a symbol, a trigger, a reminder of something they cannot fully explain. And the more they try to suppress it, the more it returns in dreams, in random thoughts, in quiet moments where everything else fades and you remain. And this is where the pressure reaches its peak, because the mind can only hold so much conflict before it demands resolution. And resolution does not always come gently. Sometimes it comes as a breaking point, a moment where everything they have been holding inside spills out, uncontrolled, unfiltered, unavoidable. But here is the question that remains right before that moment. What happens when they can no longer hold it in? Because that moment is closer than they think. There is always a moment just before everything breaks, where the mind goes silent, not peaceful silence, but a tense, heavy stillness, like something inside them has stopped pretending. And that is when the truth rises, unfiltered, unprotected, impossible to ignore. Because at that point, they cannot run anymore. They have tried distance, they have tried distraction, they have tried convincing themselves that what they feel is not real, but reality does not disappear just because it is uncomfortable, and what they feel for you has become undeniable. But here is the part that changes everything. They finally realize this was never about controlling their feelings. It was about facing what those feelings reveal. And what those feelings reveal unsettles them deeply. Because you did not just make them fall in love. You exposed the part of them that has been starving for connection, for validation, for something real. And this is where the illusion breaks, because they can no longer hide behind logic. They can no longer pretend it is just attraction. They can no longer avoid the question that has been following them. Why you? Why does this feel like something they have been waiting for without knowing it? And the answer is not simple. It is not comfortable. It is not even fully logical. Because what they feel for you is connected to something unfinished in their past. Something they buried so deeply they almost forgot it existed. But the unconscious does not forget. It waits for a reflection. And you became that reflection. But here is the truth that affects them the most. You did not just reflect who they are. You reflected who they could have been. And that realization cuts deeper than anything else. Because now loving you is not just about wanting you. It is about grieving a version of themselves they never allowed to exist. A version that was open, a version that was not afraid, a version that did not run when something real appeared. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable. Because every moment they spend avoiding you feels like a betrayal of that version, and every moment they move toward you feels like stepping into something unknown, something they do not know how to control. But this is where everything shifts. They begin to understand there is no safe path, no middle ground, no way to feel this deeply without being changed by it. So now they face a decision that does not really feel like a choice, because either way something is lost. If they walk away, they lose you. But more importantly, they lose the chance to become the person they saw through you. And that loss does not fade. It stays, turning into regret, into a quiet ache that appears years later in moments they cannot explain. But if they move toward you, they lose control. They lose the identity that once kept them safe. They lose the illusion that they can avoid vulnerability. And for the human mind, losing control can feel like losing everything. And this is the breaking point, the moment when all defenses fall, when all explanations collapse, when the truth stands on its own. They are not just in love with you, they are being changed by you. And change is never gentle. It breaks before it rebuilds. It removes illusions before revealing truth. It forces confrontation before allowing connection. And that is why this feels so intense, so overwhelming, so impossible to ignore, because this was never meant to be simple. It was meant to transform them. But here is the final truth, the one they cannot avoid. They did not choose to feel this way, but they will choose what they do with it. And that choice will shape them, not just in this moment, but in every moment that follows. Because people do not remember the feelings they avoided. They remember the ones that changed them. And you are not just a feeling in their life. You are a turning point, a shift in their identity, a doorway into something they have been avoiding for years. And now that doorway is open, it will never fully close. Because once the unconscious is revealed, once the truth is felt, once the illusion is broken, there is no returning to who they were before. There is only forward or away, and both paths come with a cost. But only one path leads to something real, and deep down, they already know it.